When I look at somebody hesitating, I do wonder, do you trust God enough to say yes? I think that's the other piece, not being scared about the places that God calls you. But it's like you can only do that when you have that foundation. God is going to call us where we can be our best self, where I can find joy and holiness and all of those things.
Welcome to Open Seat, the podcast where we create a space for authentic conversations about faith, unfiltered and unapologetic. Here, we believe that every story matters, whether you're questioning, seeking, or steadfast in your beliefs. You'll find something relatable in these heartfelt discussions. So grab your seat, get comfortable, and let's dive into today's story here at Open Seat. Today in the Open Seat, we have Sister Katherine Frazier, OP. Did I get the title right?
You did.
Been a long time practicing. We don't know anything about you. So why don't you just tell us a little bit about you?
All right. So I am an Adrian Dominican Sister. I came and I entered as a candidate in August 2015. So I've been with the congregation. It'll be 10 years in August. And right now I am a finally professed member. So that means that I have made my vows until death, and they're stuck with me, basically.
That also means you could be the next, not Mother Superior, but General Counselor, right?
No, not yet.
Oh, darn.
Because there's actually a code of canon law and it's in our congregation's constitutions, that you have to be finally professed for at least 3 years before you can be in leadership positions.
So you're under canon law, which is church law.
Yes.
And the congregation law.
Yes.
Yeah.
So we have lots, and it sounds like really intimidating and scary, but you can also think of it as those are guidelines in place for the protection of those of us who are members of the congregation.
That's a good idea.
So by having us have a period of waiting in between when we enter and when we're able to take on congregation leadership roles, it's really saying we want you to be sure and grounded in your identity as a member of the congregation before you take on these roles that can be quite difficult and wearing. So it's really for our protection as well as the being able to better serve our sisters if we are called into that kind of position.
I think you just put yourself in forefront running for leadership in 2026.
Let's not go there.
So where did you come from?
So I was born in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and my dad is a hog farmer still in that area. We've actually had a family farm for over 125 years. My dad and my uncle are still running it. So whenever I go home to see my parents, I drive by the farm and listen for the lovely oinking of the pigs. But that was my childhood. I'm a country girl at heart. I was a 10-year 4-H member, and I raised rabbits. So I was very much of a country girl, and I've gone in many different places since then.
What did you study after you graduated high school?
So I went to St. Mary's College in Notre Dame. So it's the all-women's college outside, just across the street from Notre Dame. And I designed my own major in medieval studies. So it was a lot of anthropology, a lot of English. Yes.
That works well because we are having someone on the podcast who likes to design castles.
Castles are cool.
So perhaps you two can have a conversation about medieval studies and castles.
Although my favorite is all the peasants, obviously.
Of course. And then you went on to get your master's in?
I did my first master's in archaeology at the University of Cambridge.
Yeah, that's not really the easiest thing to do.
No, and part of it was that when I was actually in undergrad, I did a year of study abroad at the National University of Ireland, Maynooth, when I was a sophomore. So I left in September. I didn't see my family again until April the next year. And then I returned home to my parents just at like very beginning of June. So I had been away from home for a while, but while I was there, there were students from my college, there was a staff person, we were doing things together. So it was a lot more support. It very much felt like we're having this experience, but we are supported by our college. And when I went to grad school in England, it was very different because I didn't have that support system. So it was hard. Yes, the academics was hard. I was constantly reading. I would read like a book a day. But the other hard part was that I felt very isolated in a lot of ways because I didn't have a support system that was with me. And I had to work hard to create a support system. It was difficult. And I mean, you had your cohort. It was not the same.
And then, where'd you get your second master's then?
So my second master's happened after I entered. So I now have a master's in pastoral studies from Catholic Theological Union in Chicago. And that was really because I hadn't had a lot of theological studies before I entered, and it was a way to give me some of the theological background that I needed in order to do the ministries that I have done since I've entered.
Yeah, so let's talk about that.
Okay.
All right, so your first ministry was?
When I was, right after I made my first profession of vows, I was asked to go to Regina Dominican High School, which is in Wilmette.
I saw the change in language there.
Yeah, it was a call that I got. And if there was a good reason, I could have said no. But when you get a call from the general counsel, you usually take it fairly seriously. So I was asked to go to Regina Dominican to be their director of mission integration. So it was really, I was in charge of making sure that the mission of the high school was present for both the faculty and the staff who were working there and for all the students. So I got to work with all those groups, occasionally with other groups like parents. So it was a pretty all-encompassing role. After Regina Dominican, I asked to be able to finish my degree because I hadn't done so yet. So I was doing part-time studies, and I was also, as part of those studies, I was doing an internship, and I was with an organization called IRIS, which is a refugee resettlement organization in Connecticut. So I was living in New Haven, Connecticut, not associated with Yale whatsoever, but I was there really working and getting to know the refugee population was there. So it was a lot of Afghan refugees that I got to meet over that year.
Oh, at that time it was?
Yes, because most of these people had been there for some time, but we were also in the midst of resettling everybody who had evacuated after the Taliban took over Kabul. So it was a fairly chaotic year for refugee resettlement in general.
And after that very quiet year
of
studies and working with refugee resettlement, what did you do next?
And then after that, I was applying for different positions, and then that's when I took on my current role, which is the Executive Director of Dominican Youth Movement USA. So as part of my role now, I get to work with high schools and colleges that have a Dominican foundation all over the country, and I put on 2 national conferences, one for high school, one for colleges. I oversee the Dominican Young Adult Program all over the country, which is part of an international movement. So there's Dominican young adults in like Colombia and Italy and the Philippines. So they're all over the place.
So since you brought this up, what does being Dominican mean to you? Because you've done mission integration. Now you're doing the director of Dominican Youth
Movement
Conference.
USA.
Yep, Movement USA. So what does being Dominican mean to you?
For me, Dominican is the spirituality and the charism that I carry. So when I was discerning religious life and I first encountered the Dominicans, I felt myself really responding deeply and saying, this is something that is already present within myself. So there's the charism aspect. So a charism is a gift in the church that we are gifted by the Holy Spirit, that our founder, St. Dominic, had and then passed down to all of his followers, even into the present day. So our charism is really about preaching. So preaching a word of mercy, a word of truth to the world, and thereby helping to bring about healing. And so spirituality is like, how are we able to facilitate that preaching? And that preaching can look a lot of different ways. So when we think of preaching, we might think, oh, it's what the pastor or the priest does on Sundays. And that's a very limited vision of what it can be. So one of my primary ways of preaching, for instance, is through art. And really, when I am creating a painting, like, that's a preaching for me. And it's my hope that when I create something beautiful, something that gets to the truth behind whatever it is that I'm creating in a painting, that it helps other people discover God in a way they might not have otherwise. So that is really at the heart of what being a Dominican is. And then we're supported by all these different ways. Like, we're supported by living in a community. We're supported through our life of prayer. We're supported through our study. So when you think of Dominicans, oftentimes we'll talk about how we're all like constantly studying. And it's so that we can really discover how we can better give God's message to another person and bring that message in a new way, and really so that we can understand the truth of who God is.
That was very beautifully said. And when you took your final vows for the congregation, you painted a painting.
I did.
Which was used on the cover.
Yes.
Of your worship aid in the invitation. And in looking at that painting and hearing your definition just now, I really had a moment of like clarity. When I looked at the painting, I saw what it was. But when you explained it in that way, I was like, oh, yeah. Yeah. She does use her gift to further the Dominican vocation. So I want to applaud you in that, because it was good.
Thank you.
What has been your greatest blessing and your greatest challenge in accepting your vocation call?
The greatest blessing is that I am doing things today that I never imagined I would do. And I feel like it's constantly an invitation to go in new directions. So one of the qualities that we talk about with Dominicans in general is that we're called an itinerant order. So that means that we are always on the move. And for me, like, that can be like an intellectual movement, but it can also be a movement in who we are as a person. So the person that I am today is not the same person as when I entered. And it's because God is helping me to discover new ways of relating to people and to be a better version of myself. It's helping me to discover new gifts that I didn't know I possessed, but which my community recognizes and encourages me to use. And that leaves me, I think my world would have been a lot smaller if I hadn't entered as a result of that. I don't think my dreams are as large as God's dreams for me. So that's the biggest blessing that I've had. I think the biggest challenge is sometimes in any vocation, there are always moments of doubt. And there's always moments where you say, what if? Like, for myself, I'll sometimes still, even though I feel very affirmed in my current vocation, say something like, oh, what if, for example, I had met somebody and I was able to have, and I had children. And it's a very different vision of what could have been. And it's not that I would have been miserable if I had been called to be a mother. Like, I would have really, I think, found a lot of grace in that call. But there is, I think the hard part is just letting yourself know that when you make a choice, it means that all those other choices that could have been, are no longer a possibility. And really coming to a point of acceptance of saying those might have been something that were compelling and beautiful and had a lot of potentials for grace. And yet that's not where I'm going. And to really have that acceptance of where God has called me today and to recognize the beauty of the moment. And that's sometimes very hard.
So speaking of children.
Yes.
You have two loves of your life right now.
I do.
Yes. Yes, you want to tell us a little bit about them?
I can tell you a little bit.
Okay.
So I have a niece and a nephew, and I'm really grateful for them in my life because they, besides the fact that they are obviously adorable, and I love watching them discover the world. Like, they talk about babies as being little scientists, and I get to see that in action of, wow, that's what a hand looks like. That's amazing.
Yeah.
And you get to see what all that looks like of a brain developing. Like, I find that fascinating. But it's also really so much of a blessing to be part of their lives in whatever way I can be. And it's a way of saying, I'm not going to be a mother, but I have the opportunity to nurture these new lives and have an opportunity to show them who God is to me, to show them love and affection, and who knows, maybe eventually integrating a deep love of medieval architecture in them, or...
Well, that's a very profound thought.
Or just a love of art. You never know.
From baby Einstein to medieval architecture.
It's all part of a spectrum.
I could see you creating a child like Miss Rachel, but it would be Miss Catherine with medieval art.
We'll see.
In your spare time.
In my spare time.
So you alluded to the hobby of art.
Yes.
But do you have any other hobbies?
I do knitting and crocheting. I've done those both for years, and I find those very helpful for... I love the creative process of it. I also do a lot of family history as a hobby. I find it really soothing to know that I have roots, and I say that, but it's, wow, I actually have like really deep roots in who I am and to know where I come from. And
what's the coolest thing you found in your background?
The coolest thing I found. I did actually do my sister's Daughters of the American Revolution application.
Oh, okay.
So I did do that.
I thought you were going to tell me like you were fifth cousins with Abraham Lincoln or something.
No, I think the closest one is like something like seventh cousins with George W. Bush.
All right.
Randomly. So.
Hey, that's pretty awesome.
But but I mean, and those things are fun and cool and all that. But I also have a lot of affection for this woman who's my aunt, like 5 times great-grandmother, who gave birth to an illegitimate child in France. She got pregnant probably in France. She was born in France. And then she moves across the border, which is 15 miles away, into Germany, and where she has her child and gets married and starts a family and then immigrates to Illinois in the United States.
Yeah.
So, like, her story is such an inspiration for me of all these adversities that she overcame and how she was able to have a family and start a new life, and is a small part of why I'm here today. So that's what I really get inspired by.
Well, I mean, you could have said that story too. I appreciate it. There's a lot to be learned from all of history.
Yes.
And I'm sure one day I'm going to say, well, you know, I knew Katherine Frazier, the executive director of the Dominican Youth Movement, when she blows up and has millions of conferences all over and stuff.
Oh, I don't know about that.
What do you think the future holds for you? Is there like a dream like you're just dying to chase, or?
At one point, before I entered, I did a program called the Cabrini Mission Corps. So I was living with the Missionary Sisters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, which are commonly known as the Cabrini Sisters. And I was doing ministry as a campus minister at Cabrini College, which has since closed. And I learned during that year about the story of Mother Cabrini.
Oh, yeah.
And one of the words that her sisters talk about when they are referring to her is they'll call it a sense of disponibilità. So it's this disposition of going wherever God calls you. And that is something that has deeply remained with me ever since that year. And when I think about where God is calling me in the future, I just think, how am I open to going where God calls me to go? And it's like a constant sense of discernment of saying, okay, this is where I am now. Am I called to remain here, or am I called to move forward? And I just hope that I will remain faithful to that movement in my life. And I might have dreams that go further than that. I've been a writer since I was a little kid, and I would love to someday do writing and publish books. Like, that would be amazing. But I don't want to hold on to that dream too tightly if God is calling me to go someplace beyond what I had dreamed of when I was 12.
You've mentioned discernment a few times.
Yes.
And I'm guessing you're pretty good at discernment for ending up where you are today.
I hope so, but there's always more to learn.
So could you explain what discernment is and maybe give us some tips on how to discern? Because I think there's a lot of people transitioning in different ways.
Yeah. So discernment is, at its root, is asking the question, between these two goods, where is God calling me? So by two goods, it's two different options that are both positive and which both have value. So marriage, vowed life, for instance. You wouldn't have an evil option in there.
Taking over the world, isn't
committing major crimes.
Darn it.
So, like, that's not really something that discernment is for. But discernment is really asking yourself, where is God calling me in this? And that's really at the simplest definition. So some ways that we can do it is that when we are in a place, I think it's first of all important to say that you need to be in a place to be able to do discernment. So if you are, for instance, dealing with mental issues, so depression, having a out of control anxiety disorder, for instance, having had a major loss in your life. So if you are in a place where one of those things are true and you are not emotionally stable, then you really are not able to enter into discernment. Like, you have to go back and address the wound before you can move forward. So that's the first principle I would recommend. The second thing I would say is that it's really important to have a good prayer life. So making sure you actually are taking time every day to pray. Wild concept.
Foreign.
And I mean, that can look a lot of different ways. I personally find, especially when I'm in the midst of a really serious discernment process, to do a lot of journaling is helpful for myself. I also really go back a lot to centering prayer as another thing that really helps me to ground myself into the process. So those things are, having that relationship with God creates a foundation for you actually to have a conversation with God about where God wants you to go. Wild. And then the third thing I would say is that it's really important to have another person involved. So one of the things that I have learned by being a Dominican is that discernment is never something we do alone. So when I have a major discernment process going on in my life, so let's say I'm discerning moving into a new ministry, or I'm discerning moving to a new location, I have people who I'm expected to talk to. And whether that's the sisters with whom I live, whether that's my general superior, it's never something that is my decision alone. It's always something I bring in and have conversations with other people. And for somebody who doesn't necessarily have a general superior or other sisters, like, there's still people in your life with whom you can have those conversations. It can be your family members. It can be a close friend. I have a spiritual director who's amazing. So that's somebody with whom I meet once a month, and I have conversations about how God is working in my life. And when I have a question of discernment, she's the person with whom I bring those questions and say, like, this is all the data that I have. These are things that are pointing in the direction of saying yes to this decision. These are things that are pointing towards no. How am I helping to bring those two together and find some kind of resolution? So those are the bringing in somebody is really, really important, I feel. Even if it's like a really close friend or a pastor, but somebody with whom you trust to open up and be vulnerable to and say, this is where I feel God working in my life. And I think a really good example of that was the first person I ever told that I felt called to become a sister. And I was in college. I was a senior. And I talked to he was the chaplain of my college, and he was a Holy Cross priest. And I said, I'm thinking God might be calling me to become a sister. I don't know what to do with this. And really getting his input, but also the fact that I told him this piece that I had been holding inside of myself for so long, it made it real. And I think that's the other benefit when we bring in somebody else. When we have it all in our head, it's going to remain in our head. We have to talk to somebody else in order to bring it into reality.
The naming of the actual thing.
Yes.
Those are some very good pieces of advice. I happen to know that one of your other jobs is vocations.
Yes, because every good millennial, I have a side hustle.
The best way to put that. Do you have any advice you'd like to give on people who are discerning a vocation in religious life?
Yeah. I think there's a few things that really help me in my vocational discernment that I really feel are helpful for other people as well. And they're going to sound like so trite, but it took me so long to really believe them. And the first is, God loves you. And it was not until I had that felt sense of God's love for me that I was able to discern religious life, because it was scary before then. And it wasn't until I got to this point of feeling God's love for me in my own life and God's love and care for me that I was able to say, okay, God is not going to call me someplace where I'm going to be miserable all the time. And God is going to call me someplace where God is going to care for my welfare. And God's going to call me to someplace where I can be my best self, where I can find joy and holiness and all of those things.
Who knew it would be Adrian?
Who knew? But those are all the things that, it sounds like so trite, but I think when I look at somebody hesitating, I do wonder, do you trust God enough to say yes? And I think that's the other piece, like not being scared about the places that God calls you. But it's like you can only do that when you have that foundation. And I would say every vocation in the church is beautiful and has a lot of really wonderful aspects to it. And maybe calling you to become a religious sister or a priest, whatever it may be, or God may be calling you to be married or a deacon, as long as we are really listening to God and really discovering where God is present to us and really trusting that God is going to call us where we can be our best self, and then we'll be okay. Like, you can only go so wrong, basically. Like, as long as you are really doing your best to listen to God, there's going to be good there.
Yeah. Yeah, no matter what the choice, God will meet you
Yes.
with goodness, as you just said,
Yeah.
wherever you end up.
That's right.
And I've heard from many different people who listen to the podcast, and they're all different ages. And so we're talking about all different places in life and things to discern. And so you have just shared with us so much wealth in that realm and so much from your own personal experience. So we're grateful for that.
You know, I really believe that life is an adventure that we're walking alongside God on. And I like to use that word adventure because it's always a sense of discovering and having that opportunity to learn more about the world and to learn more about God and the amazing people of God that are all around us. Like, they're really cool.
Well, I mean, I must say, when I met you in probably 2015, 2016.
Probably, yes.
I never dreamed we'd be on a podcast together.
Oh, no.
Like 9 years later, 10 years later. It's absolutely crazy stuff.
You never know. I don't think I knew what a podcast was at that point in my life.
This is very true. Nor did we probably think we'd be friends this long in life. But anyway. But an adventure it is.
It is.
It is. And with God, right? Not.
No, it's always God is with us and accompanying us. And that is what makes it possible to go into the scary places. And also what gives us strength and helps us to appreciate the beauty of the every moment.
I thank you for sharing all you've shared with us today. And thank you for taking us on an adventure. We are just grateful you sat with us today in the open seat, Catherine. We thank you for joining us today. We hope that wherever you find an open seat in your life, you will invite someone to join you.